to Cannalachia.
Go with me.
Come on, Cannalachia.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, Amanda.
I'm so excited for today's show.
I am too.
So we have spent so much time talking about legislation and inside and laws and things like that. And we finally have someone on the inside.
It's exciting.
It's very exciting. Do you want to
Sure.
tell everyone about
Sure.
Julie, our guest today?
So
Julie.
today's guest is Julie Cantwell, and she has worked with Kentucky Moms for Medical Cannabis, and she has really been a part of what I think is monumental. We've been working for a very long time here in Kentucky, and at the legislative level, it's took some time. There's been a can that's been kicked down the road a lot, and there's been a lot of hard work by a lot of people there. And Julie's one of those people, and we're happy to have her here today and to talk about a little bit about her story and how she got into advocacy and what she's up to today. So I'm excited.
I'm so excited that she's here, and I'm very thankful for all the work so far that she's done for our state, our Commonwealth.
I agree.
So, but we do have a very exciting piece of Canna news this morning.
That's right.
This morning? Well, I don't know.
Well, evening, morning. Depends on what time zone you're in.
It's time for some Canna news. Thank you. I appreciate you. So on Friday, the most comprehensive House bill was presented by Rep. Rachel Roberts, appropriately titled HB 420.
I think certainly awesome.
All right. I love when our representatives have a sense of humor. And it's the most comprehensive recreational bill to date. It includes the taxation. It includes really how to set up a board for cannabis regulations. And what I really appreciate, too, is it also sets up details regarding the expungement of records for people who committed nonviolent minor offenses for either possession of or intent to sell cannabis, and then goes on to talk about I believe it's 30% once a certain allotment of the taxes have come out and gone where they need to go. An additional 30% of those will be spent on community outreach into the communities that have most been adversely affected by the justice system. Mm-hmm. And it's the over-justicing, I don't the over-reaching and harm that it has caused specific communities that have been over-policed.
Well, and I think when we think about that topic, depending on what area it is, I mean, that conversation could go deeply on how people feel about that. I mean, that probably even goes back as far as to touch on topics like racism and those different things, and displaced communities and those sort of things. So giving 30% of that back to create things like jobs and programs and health and wellness and child care and all of those different things, those are beautiful programs to think about for those communities.
Yeah. And a lot of great, the actual bill itself lists the ways in which, and we can refer to it so we can be more specific.
Well, I know
maybe
that I had read that I think up to 5% local communities can have a tax on that.
Yeah.
I think there is an excess tax of
9%.
Yes, 9%, and I don't know.
And
it might be time for me to get glasses.
Right. There was specific dialogue about 30% of remaining funds would go into leadership programs, business education, health, wellness, all of those ways that these communities have been adversely impacted.
It also would forbid an employer from discriminating against an applicant or an employee who uses cannabis outside working hours. So,
Yeah.
I
As
mean,
it should. I mean, they can't. Could you imagine? Again, I go back to alcohol all the time. Could you imagine if you got fired because you went to a bar after work
right.
and your boss saw you at the bar and so you're drinking alcohol at 9 p.m. at night?
Well, that's certainly something we have to think about here. I mean, we're the bourbon capital of the world, and I have not a problem with that. That's a part of our history. But, anything can be abused. It's just one of those things that if we're going to have simple legislation and regulations for alcohol, then we should be able to have it for cannabis.
Well, yeah. No, you can't show up to work drunk. You shouldn't show up to work high.
Right.
But what you do when you're off the clock.
Exactly, is your business.
Yeah.
So
I know, Julie, that you're very much a big, what you do is Moms for Medical Cannabis. Do you have opinions about recreational bills or?
Well, do you want me to back up and tell you about how I got here and lead that into?
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Let's start with your story, and then we'll come back to that
We'll go back
question.
to that. Okay. So, let's see. Our son, Preston, Tim and I's son, our firstborn son, Preston, he's 23 now, but when he was 4 years old, he was diagnosed with epilepsy, which was, at the time it was petit mal seizures. And through the years, of course, now I said he's 23, but through the years, we have been to 4 different states, a neurologist, every medicine you could possibly think of, and eventually he was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic as drug resistant. So my husband over there says one day, Preston was 15 years old, and it was like, why don't we try medical marijuana? And in my mind, I'm thinking about him being up in his room, smoking a joint, listening to Jimi Hendrix, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, we can't do that. I mean, it scared me at first because, of all the propaganda and everything you've ever heard about it.
Of course.
So, I think that at the time, CBD wasn't around or readily available. So we had to actually drive to Colorado to get CBD, we went through Charlotte's Web at the time. And we drove all the way out there and just got one little bottle of CBD and brought it back home. And like I said, at the time, he was having around 200, I might not have said this, around 200 petit mal seizures a day.
Wow.
Which was all day long, just in and out, maybe lasting 5 to 20 seconds. But you'd be talking to him, and he's gone and comes back. And that was all day long, every day.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for you as a mom.
It was hard, but it was so hard for him. He barely made it through freshman year and sophomore year of high school.
Yeah.
And he always had to come back to the conversation that he just completely missed and try to pick up where he left off. It tore my husband and I apart. But so within 6 weeks of using the Charlotte's Web CBD oil, he had it's hard for me to remember all this, but I'm going to, he had a video EEG at Cosair's Hospital in Louisville, and it showed 0 seizures.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
That is amazing.
And he was the first patient up there that Cosair's had seen that was on cannabis oil. So it was pretty shocking. So for a few years after that, he did not have any seizures at all. And then, strangely enough, as CBD became more popular, his seizures started coming back. And I mean, I have my own theory with that. When he first started using it, it was almost like motor oil. It was very, very thick. And then as time went on, it became watery.
More diluted.
And I think that it was just a concentration issue. So let's see, fast forward. So he was having seizures again, really bad seizures. And again, we were looking for something else. We wanted him to be able to use cannabis. Let's see, was it 2000? I might have my dates messed up, but after he graduated high school, we just started letting him use it, just smoke it. I'll just go ahead and say smoke it. And he's been seizure-free for 4 years.
That's amazing.
now.
That is amazing.
And I mean, he does it medicinally. I consider it all to be medicinal, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Just because there's so many people that have reached out to us that use it for anything imaginable. And I just kept getting stories and stories and stories. And I don't care the reason that you're using it, you're still getting medicinal or therapeutic benefits from it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
It's
now.
interesting because
So,
as we've gone through and through all of our interviews with musicians and chefs and different people from different walks of life, the common theme with the majority of our guests, some, you know, we had one that didn't even start until he was 38 years old, because of a very particular kind of arthritis that he has, but the majority of our guests who started using as teenagers, it was all based, their continued usage was their anxiety.
right, absolutely.
You know, all teenagers, we go through those, you know, am I normal? Is everything, you know, everybody is judging me and I'm judging myself.
Right,
and
right.
the world sucks and the world's out to get me. But when I smoke a joint, it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Right, right.
And that really, you know, at 15, you don't have a name for that, you know?
Right.
You don't.
You just,
Right.
you just think that you're a weirdo. You don't know to call it social anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, but that's, you know, that's where what it is. And so I think a lot of teenagers even are essentially self-medicating.
And I mean, it's safer than alcohol. I mean, you know what I did at age 15? You don't want to know. I drank a lot of alcohol.
I talked about it this last week. I'm not going to force my husband to do that again. But yes, I did a lot of, you know. I did a lot of things.
Well, we all did, right? I mean, but if you look now, I mean, what's wrong with cannabis? It makes you happy. I mean, it's so good for everything. I don't see it. I see it a lot differently than even a lot of Republicans in my state do see it. I mean, they're, oh no, we can't go recreational. You know, we can't be having everybody stoned.
Well, I question
Why?
a lot of that. I think about the years worth, the years that we went through and the decades we went through of propaganda.
Yes,
And I think how, you know, misinformation and, you know, that term misinformation has been thrown around over the past 3 or 4 years a lot. But to think about how that propaganda has embedded itself into the minds of people here, to the fact that people will suffer or allow a family member to suffer because they're afraid of utilizing a plant. And, you know, I know stories from back where I grew up. I know someone who that up and left and moved their family to Colorado years ago because he was a daily user because he had major anxiety issues and he not only had a business, but his family was well known in the region, and there was issues. He'd get pulled over, and then it was just a mess.
Right.
And he literally uprooted his life and took his family and went to Colorado. And I knew some of his family. I did some business with them. But that's just one story. There's multiple
there's
stories,
so
and no
many.
one should go
Millions.
through that. And the thing is, you know, when I have friends and loved ones on both sides of the aisle, and I can see that, and I try to have respect for that and wish we could all kind of come back and sit at the table together.
Yes.
But it's one of those things that I think about when campaigns are ran, especially on the Republican side. A lot of times we hear terms like family values and we bring up Christian principles and things. But at the end of the day, if your neighbor is suffering and they're hurting and they cannot live a healthy life, then what is wrong with them using a God-given plant
There's
to be
nothing
able
wrong
to
with it.
live a better,
Right.
healthier life? To me, that is a blessing.
It's
and
a
to take
blessing.
that blessing away is wrong, regardless of what political side you're on. You know, at some point, we have to start thinking of one another as brothers and sisters and what's in the best interest of us all. And, you know, we've got other states ahead of the Commonwealth right now.
Right.
We've got other countries ahead of this nation when it comes to this topic. And we have to start really asking the question, who doesn't want us to use this plant?
I know.
I mean, the majority of people are using it anyway. Why don't we set some basic guidelines, follow those, and give back from this plant to our communities? Because you can abuse anything, and I say it over and over. We can talk about a substance, but we're not talking about the trauma, you know, at the end of the day. I really think that's where that's at.
I've got a story for you that goes kind of along with this. But, you know, I've been up in Frankfurt advocating for about a decade. And I even had this past session last year, a senator that voted against us. He showed me pictures on his phone of his x-rays of his neck. He's got all kinds of screws in his neck, and he even told me, I suffer from chronic pain. He said, I had fibromyalgia. I've got these screws in my neck. He said, I would qualify, but I would never use it because my son has been arrested for it many times, and I'm not going down that road. And I'm just thinking, that is
Makes
so
sense of that.
ridiculous.
Uh,
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
Yeah. So, Senator, hey, maybe look at some of these bills that are
Right,
looking
right,
if
right.
your son has
Right.
if they're all non-violent possession offenses.
Well,
you know.
what it was, I looked it up. It was DUIs. He was drinking and driving, and he just happened to have cannabis on him. So,
Yeah.
just,
It's not.
But again, I think, to sit down and have the conversation, I think from a standpoint of trying to find that space of being brothers and sisters and not being as judgmental as possible. I mean, observing things, we're not always ever going to always agree on things. That's just the way it is. But when I hear that, I think, here is someone who had chronic pain that could have used this plant, and he's basing it on maybe an action of his child. But the thing is we don't know what was going through the child's life at the time that this was going on.
Right.
Whether it
But
was
it
just
also doesn't make sense. I would go back and
Yeah.
go, hi, Senator. So I looked up your child offenses, and it actually
Yeah.
shows DUI. So
Yeah.
do you also abstain from any kind of alcohol?
oh, absolutely not. He's all for bourbon.
That's what I meant.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
bourbon's
I know.
okay.
Yeah,
even
bourbon's
though,
okay.
You're going to use your son as an excuse
Yeah,
to not
yeah.
help
Right.
millions of Kentuckians
Right.
without actually facing the real facts.
Well, and I think another thing that we have to look at too is, and I see this over and over, and I know that being in the public eye and making decisions and a lot of the things that legislators have to sit and discuss, they're not always easy topics, and you can't please everyone. However, one of the things that I continue to hear, and this is something I'm trying to work on in my own life as part of my healing, is the ego, and when we look at leaders, when I'm listening to them be interviewed and they go, I believe, I don't think this is right.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is I. You're a leader to
Yes.
represent the people in your
Exactly.
community. So you should be voting with what the people are saying, need, or want. And
Yes.
I mean, the majority of Kentuckians, I believe, have spoken. We have been out
Yeah.
on the road the past 6 years in different communities. And the people we meet and the discussions we have, there's multiple generations talking
Yeah.
about cannabis now. There's the great-grandparents remembering the ages of the hemp, and the grandparents, and there's grandchildren, and there's now grandchildren helping grandparents with their arthritis by saying, hey,
Right,
here's a
yes.
product for you. And I think that, it's really shifting. I think there is, though, so much stigma still from the propaganda, and that it is rooted so deeply that people will allow a family member or themselves to suffer over that. And I think if I had to push that button myself in Frankfurt, if I had to vote, I would have to sit there consciously and think about the number of children that may be epileptic, or that the person that has such anxiety they might not even be able to get out of their house to live a decent life or hold that job. I mean, these are topics that need to be addressed, and I think that there are people in communities that they're speaking to one another, but they're not being heard.
Well, and I think like you just said, what does your district think? That's your obligation, which is why I'm running, because nobody up there is asking anybody what they think about anything. They think that we elect them because we care about their opinions. We don't. We care about our district's opinions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it is.
I just, in my head, I keep going back to, all the marijuana propaganda scares of the 1950s, and then my head goes term limits.
Yes. Yes.
Because
yeah.
I think so many of these, and not everyone, I know that there's younger and newer legislature out there that are also voting no, but I think the majority of them are of an older generation who still wholeheartedly believe the nonsense spewed by, the reefer madness era.
Well, I think it's either misinformation or that they are following the footsteps of those who came before them,
Yeah.
or their campaigns are probably financed by people that don't.
And
They
now
don't
we're
wanna-
coming
yeah,
into
you're
a
right.
new
You're right.
generation of misinformation. I don't know if you guys watched the Grammys at all last night.
I got bits and pieces of it.
Well, during the commercials, there were 2 commercials back to back specifically for Kentucky, regarding cannabis psychosis and
I did not see that.
See, and I missed that.
Are
See, it's-
you serious?
and it's what I was talking about with that judgment, that verdict that came down in California. I knew that was, so I don't know if you've heard. Yeah. And I didn't want to talk about it on our show, but then we kind of did. I don't know if we edited it out actually at this point. But a woman was found not guilty by reason of insanity for stabbing her boyfriend 118 times.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And a cannabis psychosis, and I'm using quotes, because she took 2 bong hits of a specifically potent strain,
Oh, wow.
and she had only ever used cannabis less than half a dozen times prior in her life. I don't know. I'm not, but you know, the fact is that the reason why she was found not guilty was because 2 psychiatrists came on and said, well, yeah, it could be. But the fact is they weren't there at the time. It's not like you can, she has no history of mental illness that they, you know, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
But you know, but therein lies the question of, just because she has no documented history of mental illness, how do we know that she doesn't actually have an
Right.
undocumented history
Right.
of mental illness?
Well, and I think we also have to take into account cannabis use has been pretty prevalent for decades. And how many cases of this have we seen before now?
Right.
I mean, anytime that a human body takes in a substance or a chemical, there is a chance of a bad reaction.
Of course.
More than likely, there was some undocumented underlying psychological condition that is being completely overlooked, and it could have been alcohol. It could have been a prescription drug that had been given to her that could have triggered something of
Right.
this.
Absolutely.
I think again, this was probably, if it hadn't have been right now at the federal level and at the state levels, the discussion of cannabis in this country, we would have probably not heard about this case, other than the fact that a woman did what she did. You
Correct.
know, and I think again, here we go with more propaganda, because if we started to really dig in stories across the country about different things happening, I mean, I think a lot of people have questioned our justice system over the years
Right,
because of some of the things that we've seen.
Well, going back to commercials, I was just sitting here thinking that they can put a commercial like that on the television, but we're not allowed to advertise cannabis. That's
Right.
in the bill.
Yeah.
That
is so wrong.
In a country that glorifies alcohol.
Alcohol.
And we do. We glorify
make
it
a
at,
whole lot of
at
sense.
every sports venue. We do it at theaters. We do it at birthday parties.
Oh, my
we do it in commercials. We do
It's
it in
on
magazines.
every television show
And
and movie you've ever
Again,
seen.
you know, having this discussion, I don't have I'll sit down and have a glass of bourbon with you. I'm not here to like down that. You can abuse anything, but the fact is what's the deal with cannabis? Why are the companies that are making CBD and full spectrum products out of the hemp products, even though hemp at under 0.3% of THC is considered legal federally, it's still very difficult for companies to advertise and market, and it's almost like there's, I don't know, like this little floating thing of a group of people who just want it all to fail, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something to really to question.
Yeah, I don't know about, because obviously I've never, so a little bit about my backstory for you, and we can cut this out for the listeners that have heard it a million times. So I obviously started using cannabis when I was like, 13, 14, however old I was, and, for funsies, and was diagnosed with lacerated ulcers and IBS when I was 17. And so my doctor, my family physician, was like, hey, look, we all know you smoke pot. You want to just come get it from me from now on? Because it was California. It became medical in 1996. This was 1998. But it was before we had dispensaries, so I would just go to my family doctor and pick up, he's like, I can only give you 1 bottle a week or whatever. I was like, all right, whatever. It's a supplement, you know, for how much I smoke the rest of the week, but that's cool. But yeah, and then, you know, through my 20s, I really smoked recreationally, and now I'm at a point where I'm, you know, 43, and I really only use it for specific when my, you know, IBS is flaring up, or I have, that's the other thing. As like, so I use it for that. I use it for menstrual pain, and I use it for insomnia, which I, you know, often suffer from. And so it's one of those things where I was saying all that led me to the point of my eye keeps going to the pharmaceutical industry, because now I have this one plant that I can use for IBS, for my ulcers, for my menstrual, for my sleep insomnia, for my anxiety, my PTSD, instead of taking 20 different prescriptions to, you know, aid in all of those and balance them out and blah, 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 blah. You know, now I just have one.
And it's not addictive.
And it's not addictive, and they don't have their hands in the pockets, because I can, you know, back in California, I can just go to the dispensary or however, you know, in Ohio, hopefully, you know, once Ohio goes, I can just go to a friend's house and
Well, and I think
pick
that
from their backyard.
I think personally, when I think about, you know, I've said a long time when I talk about the Commonwealth, you know, I'm born and bred here. This is a part of who I am. No matter where I'm at, Kentucky's home. And it's hard for me to watch the states around us that are so ahead of us, and that people, especially people who are sick, who are getting in their vehicles or having to hire someone or whatever to get them, you know, 1, 2, 3 states away to be able to get what's working for them, what's helping them to live a healthy life. And, you know, it's sad to me. And then we have people who are discussing who's worthy, what condition is worthy. You know, leave that between the practitioner and the patient. You know,
I totally agree.
You cannot sit in Frankfurt and decide who is worthy in your community.
You really
I mean,
can't.
you don't walk in their shoes. You don't know what they deal with daily, and that needs to be left as a private discussion between their healthcare practitioner and the patient.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And one of the things, so even on the list, even on the governor's updated recommendation list, for instance, I see Crohn's disease, which is a gastrointestinal issue. I don't see IBS. And I don't see any specific there's no endometriosis on the list. There's no, you know, there's no specific women's health that we're looking at.
And, you know, to think about psychological health, you know, whether that be anxiety or depression or those sort of things. I mean, when we look at statistics here in Kentucky, I mean, when it comes to obesity, diabetes, mental health, prescription drug abuse, I mean, we're off the wall, off the charts. And then we're running around like cannabis is wrong. Cannabis can play a role in healing some of this. You know, and it just flabbergasts me. It's hard for me to understand how we can have a legislative body who wants to continue to play politics with this and kick it down the road when people are suffering. And that leads me into a question that you may or may not have an answer to, and I'm really curious about. I know there's been a couple other bills that have brought up those additional conditions to add to the medical marijuana bill, medical cannabis. I know a lot of people hear the word marijuana and they think that's dirty, but I think we need to get over that. But when I think about it, I think so. We have this executive order from the governor. Is that going to expire when the program does go in effect in January of 2025? And if that's the case, and we don't add these additional conditions at the legislative level, the people who are currently using it under the governor's executive order may lose that if it's not extended. And I would hope that the governor would look at that, and you know, I would think that he would, if that's not going to happen at the legislative level, would reintroduce that so that those people could continue on the path that they are. I mean, I can't. I'm not asking you to speak for the governor or anyone else.
I could definitely speak on that.
Yeah.
So those conditions have been introduced in a bill. I believe it's 352. Is that right?
I'm pretty positive.
And unfortunately, it's not going to go anywhere this year. I think you all both already know that.
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up, because I see that, and it's like, well, you know.
Yeah. Well,
Because we should also let our listeners know about, but you sit on the governor's
Yes,
cannabis
I'm
board
on
as
the-
well, right?
I'm on the governor's advisory committee, and I'm also on the medical cannabis programs work group. So we were the ones that worked on getting those conditions added, and it's just
And I
not-
appreciate you when I was saying all that. What I was saying was not to slight you.
No,
It's,
no.
It's to say that
Yeah.
legislature in general
Right.
shouldn't, you know,
Right.
it should be a
No, it shouldn't. You're
dialogue
right.
between a doctor and
And
their
you know,
patient.
and the first time that I went to a meeting with the medical cannabis work group, I said we need to remove all qualifying conditions and leave this between doctor and patient.
Right.
Yeah, but I was told baby steps. You know, baby steps.
Of course.
We got to first add these conditions from the governor's order. Well, what's the holdup? Oh well, we're just opening up. We know it's not going to go anywhere, but we're opening it up for a conversation. But I'm over here thinking, our patients don't have time for conversation. We need to act.
You know, the
now.
veterans that are sitting out here who have bags full of pills that
Yeah.
it's affecting their lives, and some of them are doing what they need to do to use cannabis. You know, I don't think that they sit around when they were asked to fight for their nation, for their country, and go,
Exactly.
you know, I think we should have a conversation
I
first.
think we should just talk.
I think we
first.
should talk about
Yeah,
that.
it's
Yeah.
disgusting.
You know, and
it does. It makes me
I
sick.
say that because I know people who serve this country very well, and some of those people are suffering. And I don't know how you're a leader. I don't know how you're a legislator. And you look at those people. I over the years, I've watched them go to committee meetings. I've watched them hold up bags of pills. I've watched people in wheelchairs. I've watched people who are suffering beg, cry in these committees and say, "This is helping me." Why do we
Yes.
keep kicking this down the road? And I know I sound like a broken record,
No,
you all,
I
but
know,
at some
it's-
point,
yeah.
this has got to be.
Yeah. I was at one point I was working with a veteran organization down in Texas who brought up the 22, and I don't know if that number
Yes, the suicides
still exists or if it's increased or decreased. But we lose 22 veterans a day to suicide because they are not getting proper treatment. That's not to say that marijuana would end all veteran suicide by any means, but I think that there is a lot of help that it can from anxiety and PTSD and all of the other maladies, physical pain, emotional pain that come with having served in active duty.
Well, and I know some legislators have brought up, so to give the Kentucky legislative body the benefit of the doubt, they did appropriate funds to the University of Kentucky for a cannabis research facility. Right. And a lot of people are like, well, we have that. Let's wait around. Here's the thing. That, when we start talking about the rescheduling or descheduling of cannabis, it really needs to happen at the federal level so that further research can happen and so that program at UK can flourish, and that's really more at a federal level. But while we've got decades upon decades to go of research, I get that for specific conditions, but there is enough anecdotal evidence that states that cannabis works for people, and we can still continue on as things progress and allow that cannabis research facility at the UK to flourish. I mean, I would love to see that happen in the Commonwealth. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that we should tell people who are suffering today with certain conditions that, what, you're going to have to hang on and wait until we can do that.
Yeah.
Because Israel, California, Colorado, there are smaller studies that have been done, and there are practitioners who have worked with patients who have documented what has worked. There is enough information out there to allow people to utilize cannabis.
These studies, by the way, have been going on since the turn of the last century. Let's be clear about that.
Right.
This isn't. We haven't just started studying cannabis. What's happened is there have been, over a century now of studies done on cannabis that a lot of them have been pushed away, tucked away, and just not discredited, so to speak, but just ignored.
Yeah.
Because there were I was reading the other day an article about all of these different doctors that came out in the 1950s to actually discredit the reefer madness propaganda. and all of their studies showing the medical benefits of THC, of marijuana, and all of these different, I can't remember all of the maladies that they had studied, but, they were all going, what are you talking about? Like, no, this is actually great. And, so we do have over a century of studies that already exist that show its benefits.
I mean, so why do we need the UK Research Center is my question. I mean, I think it's a waste of money.
Well,
just myself, because we've got the studies.
I think, I think there's studies there. I think I can see kind of that on a scale. Like, I don't think everything should be based on the research facility at UK, but I think about things like, so I went to school to study massage therapy, and I started utilizing CBD on my body, and then started using it with some folks, and ended up helping to develop some products. And I would love to see those products go into some trial studies, but to do that, cannabis itself has to be rescheduled or descheduled, and it would take a facility of some sort to be able to do that at the clinical level. So I get that. I'm not like totally against it. I think what kind of maybe ruffled my feathers or hit me in the ass was the fact that we felt like we shouldn't move forward for patients today based on the research center. So yeah, but I don't disagree with. There's a lot of funding I think that gets thrown around and wasted.
A lot.
That one I don't know. People have their opinions about the University of Kentucky, but I think I would love to see Kentucky flourish when it comes to further research of cannabis, but I don't think we need to tell the folks who are suffering that they need to wait for that.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
No, you're right.
so
Yeah, no, I mean, further research just to
I
have
agree.
a deeper understanding, sure, why not? But research needed to, further legislation, no. Go fuck yourself.
Well, I
Sorry.
mean, people are already using it.
Right.
So why put these people in jail?
Right.
exactly.
You know?
And I say that, like you say, I'm right, but maybe I'm not right. That's just my opinion. But I don't know. And we have to think about that. We have to think about today. And I know Amanda and I have talked about this before and with other guests, but there are people serving time right now for cannabis, but we've got organizations and companies all across this nation currently, selling product. And it's like, how do we do that? How do we do that? And how have we allowed for so long for us to utilize this substance to create the barrier of racism and to criminalize certain people? Not, is there a handful of people somewhere in the world that's like, oh, if we keep cannabis like this, then this is what we can do? Who's holding on to that last grip? Is it pharma? What is it? And to each their own. I'm not against Western medicine. I'm about integrative health. And I want to see East and West talk. I want to see people sitting at the table. I want us to kind of come together and try to find some sort of common ground to heal individually and then to heal collectively. And I think that there is a possibility if we can do that. And I think cannabis plays a role in that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Antibiotics for the flu, echinacea for a cold.
There you go.
Well, and I'll be honest with you.
Or whatever, antivirals, whatever.
I use a lot. I create some natural teas and tinctures and stuff of my own from plants so that I don't overuse antibiotics because, I'm glad that antibiotics were created. I mean, obviously we need them, but we've also got into a place where when I speak with practitioners that I know where they've been put in the place between insurance companies and a lot of other things to make certain decisions and also malpractice, that if a patient, let's say they come in and they have a condition that they don't really need an antibiotic for, but they continually say, I need an antibiotic. So the doctor's put into the place where if I don't write the script and something happens, it could put me in a liability issue. So, we have seriously overprescribed antibiotics, in my opinion, in this country.
I don't even know. I haven't been on antibiotics in like a decade.
Well, no, and I haven't took any either, but I know people who do. But I think there are natural substances that people could use for smaller, less dangerous conditions per se, to kind of not overuse antibiotics. And I'm a big thing about if you do have to have an antibiotic, start eating some kimchi and take some probiotics and get your gut health in check, But that's a whole nother episode. So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
not what we're here for.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm curious, it's been in the back of my brain while we've had this ongoing conversation, is you talked about how, when someone had suggested cannabis for your son when he was younger, and your fear of, me in his room smoking a joint.
Yeah.
Have you now gone and further and experienced that with other people who you've been able to sort of calm their anxieties?
Well, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. So my mother, who is, she's pretty conservative, but she was recently, almost 2 years ago, diagnosed with glioblastoma, brain cancer.
Yeah.
And, I just said, this is what we're doing, period. I know what we need to do. We need to do FICO or RSO, and that's what we're doing, and that's all there is to it. She had went to, the doctor had told her that her prognosis was 12 to 18 months. And, I immediately started her on FICO, and she is just past 22 months, and she's doing great.
Amazing.
And this is a tumor that comes back like 100% of the time very fast, and it is staying gone and no sign of reoccurrence. And I'm a believer, and she is totally a huge believer. Even, so a lot of concern, I would never ever do that, but she said, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
And
it's
she's
always
doing great.
if it works, it's because my husband lost his mother to cancer as
I'm so
well,
sorry
and
to
in the very beginning of her diagnosis, we tried to be like, hey, what about? And she, no.
She wouldn't do it.
And after a few months, and she was living with us, we finally kind of convinced her, and I think it was
Not even. I just made her doctor get the medication.
so we convinced the doc as to convince the doctor. But it was then that we finally, she was able to eat a full meal, and she has passed away, but there was moments of, even if it was just the mental, and the hunger, that there was joy. I feel like that was brought about. I don't. Am I explaining what I'm explaining right? I made her a lobster. She hadn't really been eating, but she took one of her, her marijuana pills, whatever it was, and she ate a full lobster dinner that I cooked for her. And we sat and we watched, a great movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and so there was moments of joy, and I felt like a lot of that came from the release of the anxiety and the release of the all of the anguish that comes from knowing you have this diagnosis.
Well, and sorry.
No, go ahead.
It was, when you think about losing your mom, there was just no other option to me. I knew what needed to be done, and we were doing it, period. And that's just the way it is. And, with my son, too, that's my husband was like, we've got to try this. Yeah. No matter what.
I couldn't imagine who wouldn't, and hearing the story that you were just talking about was it your grandmother, Chill?
Mother.
I'm sorry. Is to think about, a lot of times we have legislators and folks who, they're like, okay, I'm okay with it with palliative care at the end of life. But it's kind of like, why are we not allowing people to live also in those moments? And why has it just got to be in the last very few weeks or days? Why can't they have a better life?
Very much fighting, and she was actually technically in remission at that point. Her, I don't, not to get into the specifics of what happened, but it, so it wasn't, thankfully, it wasn't just because of palliative care. It was actually like, let's, ease some of everything else that's happening. And I believe that the easing of the stress in those moments actually did help to bring her into remission, because when you reduce those things, when your body gets to relax a little bit, and it can start to really heal itself.
Well, and I know sometimes, when we're on the show and we're or on the podcast and we're speaking with people, we usually ask them, look, what was your first experience with cannabis? And we've talked about, your son and stuff, and that's
Right.
not something, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to, but I know that in the past you've publicly shared some of your
yeah.
own story, and
Absolutely.
I commend you on that, and I think that someone who's willing to put their self out there to represent their people regardless of their party, that have
Right.
the ability
Right.
to meet people where they're at by sharing their own stories and their
Right.
own experiences is extremely important. So I don't know if you want to share any of your backstory.
You want to know when the first time that I used cannabis?
I mean, sure, if that's something you...
Okay, this is traumatic, kind of. But I was 15, and back then there was, when I grew up in Owensboro, and there was a liquor store that would serve us no matter, what.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
all had,
I mean,
had
we
that
all
liquor
did that,
store.
right?
I was in California. I have
So,
that. I know that
exactly.
guy.
See, I
So-
grew up with bootleggers.
Yes.
So-
Oh my gosh. Okay, so some friends of mine and I had went out to. We went to the liquor store and we got. I think it was Jack Daniels is what it was, and we were out in the country just on this old road drinking, and someone had brought out a joint. And by then I was already completely wasted, 15 years old, and I had never smoked it before. So you know what happened. I smoked it and I was so sick.
You went to the uncomfortable planet.
I
is what
was
we call that.
throwing up. We were in a car, a little escort. Do you remember those
Oh, yeah.
escorts? Yes.
Yeah.
And there was like a window, and you had to push it to pop the window out. And I was trying to throw up outside of that window, and it was
Like,
inside.
are you talking about
outside.
like
It
the
was
bent window?
Yes, like a bent window, and I
Yep.
was like, pull over. It was horrible, and it was
The uncomfortable
awful,
planet.
Awful. So that's how I kind of learned: don't drink first,
Right?
and then smoke. But yeah, so
Yep.
yeah,
But I'd love to have your son on at some point too.
he
and-
would like that. I think he would really enjoy that.
Yeah,
That would be
I'd
really
love
cool.
to hear his
Yes.
perspective of
Yeah.
how much, because although he
Yeah.
started using cannabis at 15, it was not recreational like the
Right,
rest of us. It was
right,
monitored by
right.
his mom.
Right,
which,
right.
That's a fun. What?
Yes.
Awkward. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what's even more awkward is that when he turned 21, he'll kill me for telling you this story, but one of his friends gave him a bottle of red wine, and he decided to drink it one night. Had never drank before, and I had went to bed, and he woke me up in the middle of the night about 4 o'clock in the morning and said, "Mom, I've thrown up all over my bedroom.
Oh,
Will
and
you
red
please
wine
help?
and
Will you please
oof.
help me?" And I felt his pain.
Yeah.
But you know what? I don't think he's drank since.
He went to the
I think
uncomfortable
that,
planet.
I think that was like
It's a rite of
absolutely
passage.
not. Yeah.
And red wine is the
and as a
worst.
mom,
Oof.
I'm so proud of that. I'm
Right?
proud that he. I'm proud that he doesn't drink. I don't have to worry about if my mother only knew what I did at that age.
Right?
Whew, I don't have to worry about that with my kids.
Yeah.
So.
My dad was a rock star. My mom was a hippie who dated Jimi Hendrix.
Oh
So,
my gosh, how cool is that? I wish Meatloaf was my dad.
I miss him. Sorry, Dad. I love you.
Was
I miss
he just so cool?
you. He was. He was.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like any dad, I mean, at the end of the day, my dad,
He was
you
your
know,
dad.
he was a rock star on stage and in public.
Yeah.
But at
he was your
home,
dad.
He whooped our ass if we failed, class, or if we talk back or whatever. He
can't
was a
imagine
good
that.
old boy from Dallas, Texas, that grew up playing football and singing in a church choir.
Really? Oh wow,
Like-
that is so cool.
So that's that was his, there was Dad and there was
Yeah.
Meatloaf, and
Wow.
it was in some ways Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but in reverse. I don't know.
Yeah,
But yeah,
so neat.
I love him. I miss him every day.
Of
you know.
course,
Yeah.
of course. I miss him too, and I never even met him.
But yeah, no, so it's always your story is just so exceptional, and I love
Yeah, well, thank
hearing
you.
about it.
And I don't use cannabis now. If I had a reason to use it, I would. But the past 10 years, have been so hard being an advocate for this, because I've had so many legislators and public officials call me a pothead, and we would stand out on the street in my town and hold signs saying, please support cannabis, honk for cannabis, and they would say, oh, she's a panhandling pothead, and just stuff like that. I mean, they would call me every name in the book, knowing that I don't even use it. But if I had to use it, if I needed to, then I would.
Yeah, my mom, when the PTA ladies would be mean to her when I was in junior high, she would say, yeah, I tried pot once, and I never exhaled.
Oh, I never exhaled.
And
there you go.
It's interesting that you say that, Julie, because when I'm not from your area, but some of the stories you've shared with me remind me a lot about or of the area where I grew up. And when I think about that, you're out there fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, and you're doing something that's not easy. And people are criticizing you for that. I think that's where we have to, that's where we have to stop, and we have to pause, and we have to think collectively, because, I mean, what kind of strength does it take, and what kind of person does it take to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, but allow people to disgrace them while they do it? I mean, I think there's a famous story about that. Yeah. So I would have people think about that, like, to represent and to stand up for others, even if it's against the grain.
Well, I'm very open about my past, and I have suffered with drug addiction myself. So I was a prescription pain pill addict for 8.5 years, and then when I came off of that, I was put on Suboxone. So, and at the time I didn't know much about it, but I was hooked on Suboxone for another 8.5 years, and I'm very open about it. I took myself off of Suboxone and went through a massive withdrawal that was life changing. My husband knows.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
My mother is an active addict, unfortunately.
Yes. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It was such a psychological nightmare. Not just the physical aspects of coming off of it, but the psychological was like being reborn again. I tell people that all the time, because everything just changes. Your perception of everything just changes. And now I see things a lot differently than I used to. But I can relate to drug addicts, and I understand that that's a massive problem that we have to deal with in my area.
I think all of us, if we don't have someone in our family, I know I do. You've already been vocal about it. I don't know any family that's not been affected by it. And when we think about the Commonwealth, we think about Eastern Kentucky, we think about Appalachia. I mean, it was taken advantage of when it came to the topic of opiates and pain medication. And I'm not against that. We have those tools and resources when needed, but the way we did it and how that rolled out, and how some of the most simple conditions you can be handed a bottle of opiates for, it's disturbing. And to think about you threw your hat in the race of a very hard thing to do, to put your face out there and run a race, especially in a time where for some odd reason we have to hear everyone trash their opponent rather than be positive and talk about what they're going to do. I know my generation, maybe I'm not speaking for all of you, but I'm tired of hearing the negative campaigns. I don't care what party you're from. I want to hear your ideas and how you plan on getting that done. Don't tell me about the mistakes and the past of your opponent, because you're wasting my time, your time, everyone's time. Let's not do that. And where I'm going with that, I'm kind of rambling, sorry, is I think about, I'm not in your area, but to run that race, as a voter, when I think about leaders and leadership as a whole, I think, why not have people? I want people leading who have had that experience, And I'm not saying that everyone that sits in Frankfort hasn't had any specific experiences, but I know that if you have personally experienced that 8 years of addiction, you have the ability to vote honestly. And that's not about what you believe, it's what you know. Because you've experienced that, and you can sit with the people who are experiencing that or living that each day. And to me, that's important. It's not about whether there's a D or an R next to your name. It's about how are you representing the people that you're there for. And I think
can go on all day about that. How much time time to you all day. Well, as you know, I'm running for state representative in my district, and the local party there is completely trashing me. I am a registered Republican, and I'm running on the Republican ticket in the primary. And the party over there is completely trashing me, and not because of my character, not because of my work ethic, nothing like that. It's just because I supported Andy Bashir.
Because that's where we've come to in
Which
politics.
Is ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
He's done a great job. Why does that have to be a problem?
Well, I mean, whether you agree or disagree with the governor, there's probably at least 2 or 3 things that I personally probably didn't agree with Andy. But we're not always going to agree. But do I think Andy did the best with what he was given? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I couldn't imagine being in his place and being handed what we just went through for 3.5 years or almost 4 years or however many years it's been because we've lost time. But it's crazy to me. It's kind of like, it's obvious that some Republicans crossed the aisle to vote for him. I mean, let's take a look at that. And a lot of people across the nation watched our governor during this, and whether we agree or disagree with things on that, because there are some things that I didn't agree with, but that doesn't mean that I don't think Andy, I don't think Andy's a bad person. I don't think Andy is, I think the majority of the decisions he's made were made out of compassion for others. I don't know. I can't really speak for Andy, that's not my job.
But also, I just want to, not to get off the Andy Bashir train for a second, but to get anything done, I think politically on a federal level, but even more specifically on a state level here in the Commonwealth, there has to be more bipartisanship.
There has to be
more coming together.
I agree.
We're not going to accomplish anything really if this HB 420 and the rest of them all brought in and co-sponsored and backed by Democratic leaders with no Republicans backing them. Whether or not, and I don't know every Republican representative, but a part of me feels like some of them probably on a personal level, I have an inkling, would probably support the bill if they didn't feel as though, all of their fellow Republican representatives would, oust them and, have a situation where, we turn the Commonwealth, sessions turn into what's been going on in Tennessee for the past,
it's a high school popularity contest is what it is. And so many of them are not looking at their district and listening to their district.
Yeah.
Where has that gone? And like I said, doing this for a decade, I have, because you were there. I mean, we went up there and beat our head against the wall for a decade because they would not listen. So I thought, I need to do this, and I need to listen.
Yeah.
Let's do more listening.
I wasn't there as much as you all were there, but I in my past, I have some experience of being down there. And I get that. And when you're talking about bipartisanship, we have seen some Republicans who have sponsored or co-sponsored some bills that are related to cannabis. However, it's really hard to get people on board the bipartisanship, it's like
together.
And I know that word a lot of times is thrown out and maybe it's becoming like just a key flashy thing to say, but I think at the end of the day it's how we are going to progress. And there is a word that's another key word that people take out of context is to use, but why don't we want to move forward? Why do we not want to grow? Why do we not want to prosper? And we have to do that by sitting at the same table. And the 3 of us sitting right here probably have a lot of opinions, and they're not always going to be the same thing. But I think to have respect and to be able to hear one another and to discuss those things and try to move forward.
I love the quote, voting for politicians is like waiting for a bus. The first bus that comes might not be getting you exactly to the front door of your destination.
Yeah.
But if it's getting you a block or 2 blocks away,
Yeah.
you're still going to get on that bus.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you're going to walk the rest of the way, or you'll catch the next bus.
Right,
But you're
right.
not going to sit and wait for another 5 years until a bus is invented that takes you to the door of where you want to go.
Well, I think if I was sitting down there to cast a vote right now, knowing that, and it's even coming out of some of the senators and legislators' mouths when they say, well, we're headed there. We know it's going there. I would want to know that I was on the right side. And maybe I shouldn't say the right side because we throw the right and wrong around a lot, but maybe, things change. I mean, history writes itself, and I think this is a monumental moment because when we think about cannabis, whether it's medical or recreational, at some point we have to look at that as an individual liberty in a way, and whether you're independent, whether you're libertarian, whether you're Republican or Democrat, at some point, I think personal individual liberties and being able to live your life the way I believe that our founding fathers wanted us to, so that we don't have to agree, but we can live in peace and we can prosper. I think that, we've got to come to some sort of common ground there. And not verbatim, and I can't remember the quote since we're talking about quotes, but the one that has always stuck with me is the reminder that when you're on the side of the majority, it's time to take a pause.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are or what side that is. When you're on that side, it's time to take a pause and to think and to question. And at this point, I really feel like, if we're moving that way and you're a leader, then why not get on board, because this is affecting people's health.
Yeah.
And we're watching it happen all across our country, and I just don't want Kentucky to be last,
No, and I will say that she had asked me Amanda had asked me about recreational, or you did, one of y'all did. And, a lot of people do ask me that, and I always say that recreational cuts the red tape for patients.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really does. And why would we not want that for patients?
Mm-hmm.
Why would we want to stop sick people from getting? That's the opposite of freedom to me.
Well, and we're currently living in a time where you're required to have health insurance or be fined, and then you pay a deductible to be told later, well, I'll have to argue for 6 months to qualify, and then once you qualify, it's actually cheaper if you didn't have insurance to get
my
the
gosh.
procedure. So, it's asinine.
It's-
So it's kind of, seriously, it is.
It
it's
is.
like,
Yes.
it makes your head spin.
I'll tell
It
you,
does.
back
It
in the
does.
early days of my just working in dispensaries in LA, my favorite part of the job was when that, old lady who's never, was scared of marijuana growing up comes in and goes, my doctor sent me here. What do I do? And that was my favorite part of the job, was going, yes, ma'am. So what is it that you're suffering from? And okay, here are the strains, and this is how to do this and that. And it was, and to see them light up and then come back in 5 days, a week later, thank you so much. And, that was great, or I want to try something new. But, obviously being in LA, majority of my clients were like, 18 plus coming in from UCLA or whatever, like, I got a call for whatever nonsense they had. But my best days were the days when it was someone who was genuinely coming in for a real medical reason and really wanting to have having this experience for the first time, and then seeing that the difference in just their being.
And I've totally stood behind Kentucky Moms for Medical Cannabis, Kentuckians for Medical Marijuana, everyone that's been fighting, and I'm for having dispensaries and stuff. I think it's a great place for people to get educated if they're completely new to it or have a certain condition. There's a lot of positive to having that program. But like when you say, it does cut the red tape, and that's what led me into my little rant on the insurance, because those are the things that Americans are currently having to deal with. And so, people who are suffering don't have time sometimes to wait.
No, they don't.
And it does cut the red tape. And you're talking about how when you were in California, having people come in with a condition and you talk to them about a strain or that sort of thing. I mean, we have in certain recreational states, we have places that may not be quote unquote just a dispensary that are selling certain products that they legally can, that do have employees or owners who are educated to help guide people, which is it's a positive thing. So, I mean, you may not find that in every retail location across legal states, but I think it's happening more and more because everyone I meet who gets behind cannabis to sell it, it's because they're passionate about it,
Right.
So, even in LA, I left. I know all the sorority girls are going to show up if I say it one more time. Sorry, inside joke. If I say LA too many times in my accent,
Here they come.
then blonde sorority girls show up and
that's funny.
harass me. The thing, but I digress. No, so in the dispensaries now, even we're recreational now, but you go in if it's your first time at a dispensary, and even though it's recreational, they still refer to you as an FTP or a first time patient. And you get a discount, and then usually you walk into a brand new dispensary, the first question is, cool, what are you looking for, what are you trying to get out of it, and what's your dosage? We usually, with guests that are actively using cannabis, we ask them for like, what's your bad dosage story?
Yeah.
Because I even have we got married in June in Vegas, and I ate too many edibles and tried to leave the hotel room, and it was a terrible idea, and we went back and got room service. It happens. It still happens to the best of us these days.
Yeah.
But I love that sort of feeling of, things have changed, I think, a little bit, even at the going back to, maybe it's because we're going back to the same dispensaries that we've been going to. So now it's like, what do you want? Cool. Here it is. Get out. But that's because it's, they keep every time you go, they take your ID. They go, oh, okay, you've been here 6 times, or whatever it is. But for the most part, the level of service that you do get, especially as a first timer, and really, or I've had instances where I've gone in and gone, hey, I've already been here for myself, but I'm here for my mom. This is what we're dealing with. This is what we're going through. Help me out, and it's great. And I also love this because, so while I can grow my own flower, that's all fine and well. I love dispensaries for the new ways in which technology is helping them to infuse. So like my favorite's a brand called Positivity, where I can get an infused tea. There's an infused honey where the bees are actually making the honey from the cannabis, and yeah. So all these like that, like I'm not gonna start my own apiary, in order to make my own infused honey. I would love to, but my husband's gonna. He's like, we don't need bees in the backyard. I'm sure.
I have
Why not?
See, I would totally have an apiary. Like I have a plant problem. So so if you ever you want to partner on that, we can do an apiary somewhere in between.
But I digress. But like that's my like I love going in and what are the new products? Who's doing what these days with, and not so much the gimmicky ones, although they make me laugh. I don't know if you saw Mike Tyson was doing
the ears.
He was doing the ears, the gummy ears, which is it's. I'll tell you how well that company has now gone under.
Has it?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that.
When they're that gimmicky,
it had a bite out of it, right?
Yeah, it was supposed to be Evander Holyfield's ear, and it had a bite out of it. Where Tyson had bit Evander's. Yeah, that whole company's.
Okay.
Because the gimmicky stuff really doesn't work, and people are starting to figure that out. That cannabis users that are regular users, we're savvy people, and while we might try a new strain or a new product, I'm not gonna go far from my tea, my honey, My I'm not a smoker anymore. I like edibles. I have a very specific brand, and I like tinctures. And I might try a different brand of tincture. Yeah. But my eye gets drawn to like not the the bubblegum syrup, blah blah blah. Like right now I'm using Papa and Barkley as a brand, and it looks very something you would buy at the holistic shop. It's not got a bunch of cartoons on it.
Yeah.
and I see that happening more and more with product as I go to Colorado and Vegas and California. Right. They're drifting away from those like cookies and Oreos and to a more sophisticated product for the most part.
When I think about that, I think a lot of times that's kind of like your college goodies. When we were creating the Ancient Aromas brand of products, what we sit down at the table and we talked about is we wanted a brand that was a simple look, but we wanted it to look rustic because it was based around what did the ancient folks use? What plants were they using? And then you look into the terpenes of those plants. But we wanted something that was classic, that would age well, that could be a household name product. Growing up, my grandparents raised me, and there was things like Riley salve that you can still buy, and they were in these old tins, and those brands, and they're still alive and well today, probably 100 years old. And I was like, I want a product that's a good quality, that has that label, that can be a household name, regardless if you're in New York City or you're in Lexington, Kentucky, or whatever. But I agree with you. I mean, there's a place for everything, but I think, you can have your Cheetos that are infused or whatever that might be, but what really draws my attention is the terpene profiles of products.
Cheetos. I still want Cheetos. I have a whole thing about everything that's infused is always sugary, and I just want I want some infused beef jerky, some infused Cheetos.
I did that just for you,
right? Okay. Some Doritos, something. If it has to be like a not gross is not the word, but it have to be an unhealthy junk food. At least give me something savory, man.
Well, I guess we could keep it healthier. We could do some hummus.
Yeah, that's true. You could do some hummus.
Yeah, you can do infused hummus. No, I actually was up last night thinking about like if I go through with my idea of doing an infused brand, sauces.
Nice.
Like aiolis and barbecue sauces.
Yeah.
Alabama whites. That's where I got, because he made me some Alabama white sauce yesterday, using a recipe from a Vegas chef a chef that I love. But yeah, and then I was like, what if you infuse this? Because you infuse the mayonnaise that goes into the sauce. Yeah. Anyway,
very interesting. No.
It's kind of making me hungry.
Okay, So, I want to ask you a few more questions, Julie, on a more personal level, but don't worry, not about your cannabis use in particular.
Yes.
And I think we all probably know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway to hear it in your own words. But what is your greatest inspiration behind this fight for cannabis?
Oh, my goodness. Well, who or what?
Either one.
Okay. Well, a lot of people, obviously, Kentucky patients especially, we did the tunnel wall. I don't know if you saw the tunnel wall at the Capitol, and that was such an amazing thing that we did.
Yeah,
I remember the last... I think 2022, we had went up there and banged our head against the wall again, and then were let down. And I remember at the end of that session, I said, next year, I'm coming up here and I'm bringing every patient that needs this.
Good for you.
Well, obviously I didn't bring every, but I did bring about 400, and I put their names and faces.
I love that.
And they loved it. And I thought that was so sweet, because as legislators walking through that tunnel, they needed to see those faces. They needed to see the babies, the kids, and we had 400, and we lost 40 of those patients during that time. Yeah. And we would put little angel wings on their picture, so they needed to see that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they did see that. But back to getting off topic here. My greatest inspiration. So besides my husband, and you all, and Meatloaf, of course. I'm really doing it up here on a, but of course my son and my husband. But I'll tell you, when I first started Cannabis Advocacy, the very first time I went to Frankfurt, I met with Senator C.B. Embry, and I was a nervous wreck. You know, I didn't know oh my gosh, what am I doing? What am I doing? And so I went in his office and I sat down and I said, how do you feel about medical cannabis? And he said to me, how I feel about it doesn't matter. How does my district feel about it? How do my constituents feel about it? And that just floored me, because I'm like, wow. And, you know, I know we've already talked about this a little bit, but, you know, and that was 10 years ago. And since then, I've not had not one legislator that I've met with has said that exact same thing. They've all just said, well, like you said, you know, I don't like it for this reason or whatever. They never say, and not only that, but even on the House and Senate floor, not one of them has ever stood up and said, okay, I'm not for this, but I'm going to vote on this. I'm going to vote yes because my district wants me to. They all just had said no, and this is the reason why, blah, 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 blah.
It's telling.
You know?
I mean, and it's what they're doing in
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yes. So, and so C.B. Embry, he passed away a few years ago of cancer, but, you know, he was such an inspiration, I think, to me, because he always listened to his district. And even if it went against his personal opinion. And I mean, you know, I'm hoping that I get elected, but if I do, that's the kind of legislator I want to be. I want to make sure that my district comes first.
Well,
always.
and I think that's ultimately what we need. And you know, when we talk about that, there are people in Frankfurt. There are some people that are still there that were there when I spent some time down there. I mean, there's good people there. Don't get me wrong. And I believe there are some that really do listen, and they take those green slips and they take those phone calls and those emails, and they take that seriously.
And they'll respond personally.
Right. Or it may be against their personal belief, but they actually vote the way that their people want them to.
Right.
And that, I mean, that's critical, I think.
I mean, if you don't do that, why are you there?
How are you leading?
Yeah, how are you leading?
Right.
And I mean, I feel like that should be the main priority, and it's just not. And I don't want to be that way. If I get up there and become corrupt, you pull me to the side and say, no, absolutely not. And
I'm holding you
and now you got
Julie.
this recorded. So, yeah, I told my husband the same thing. He's like, my husband hates politics. Hates it.
And I think you know, to give folks that are in that role the benefit of the doubt too, is, you know, the system of how we not necessarily the legislative process, but our system at the federal and the state level, when we look at lobbyists, lobbying dollars, when we look at running a campaign and not having term limits, these types of things to me is where we're kind of being thrown around, and we kind of have a broken system because, you know, we have people who are fighting for their people for good reason or good purposes, but what happens is, you know, terms show up, and every 2 years, every 4 years, whatever that term might be, you got to run a campaign. Campaigns are costly. People are knocking on your door. I mean, you may be knocking on your folks' door, but you got somebody knocking on yours in Frankfurt going, hey. And those are things that have to be looked at too. You know, I know that there are ethics and things that are put into place to try to protect the people and the legislators. However, that's something that we have to, you know, take into consideration. But I think to be a true leader, you really do need to listen to your people. And you may not agree with what they want, but if you're there to push that button for them, that's what you should do.
And I mean, you have to have compassion. I mean, you know, some people would say, well, maybe you don't have to have. You have to have compassion, I think. You have to be able to understand what people are going through. And
I think on the flip coin of that too, you know, if you're sitting in Frankfurt and you have to make a decision for the majority of your people, you're going to have the minority of your people who are like, she shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, blah. And you know, there's a benefit of the doubt for them too, that's not always an easy job either to represent because you can't please everyone.
Well, that's true. But like, and I think about that too. And I think people need to do like what we've done. Go to their legislators, drive their legislators crazy. I have been known to drive my legislators crazy. I mean, you've really just got to stay on them until you get what you need done.
Well, and maybe
basically.
that's something for the listeners, if you're hearing this, is to really, I think people have been worn out a lot over what maybe they feel is a broken government or a broken system. And, pay attention, pick up that phone and call, leave a message, and, call your representatives and let them know how you feel.
Right, absolutely.
And, that's between you and them. It's not like you're not broadcasting on the radio. If you want to, fine. But if not, pick up the phone and call. But, I feel like a lot of people have, we even see that, I think, in voter turnout. People have gotten so frustrated over the years of just like feeling like they're not being heard.
And it's also, I think I've said it more than once on this show. So again, coming from California, before every election, we get our voter book.
Yeah.
And it details every bill, piece of legislation, every candidate for everything. And you get the big book at the beginning of the beginning of the end of the when we're about to vote, and it really goes pros and cons of everything. And it's written, the pros and the cons, by the way, are written by firemen and a librarian, so it's written by non-politicians but public servants. And then at the very end, you get a smaller booklet that's actually meant to take with you to the polls. That's got your sample ballot, and it again has all of the same information as the big ballot, but it condensed. So it really, California is, at least in Los Angeles County, I should say, really heavy into voter education.
Oh, I believe it.
And,
yes, we
and
need
I
more of
miss that. I miss,
we don't have that here.
I might be more apt to move between party lines. Right now, the person who I am, I tend to go in and just go Democrat down the line. I do as much research as is available to me, but if I have to go to Ballotpedia, and if a person doesn't, a representative who's up for election doesn't go to Ballotpedia and doesn't fill out the questions and doesn't have the information there, I'm probably not gonna vote for you.
Well, like Justin said, what we do here is smear campaigns. That's pretty much, that's how we elect our officials. Who can cut the other one down the most and make them look the worst.
Don't get me wrong. That's still how the advertisement and the BS works in Los Angeles. It's just, but I chiefly ignored that, and I would try and actually sit down and take, at least a few hours. And read through and understand.
I wish people would do that. Or just, like with this going on with me, with people slamming me on issues, none of these people in the Republican Party of Hardin County have ever even asked me my opinion on anything. They just went to Facebook, they stole my pictures, and they say, oh, she's a horrible liberal, blah, 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 blah. I mean, just...
So I'm watching Parks and Rec right now, but I'm at the part where Leslie Knope is, running for representative against the guy from the sugar company, and I feel like it's all that the Jennifer, what's her name, the actress that comes in, and she's just playing a game. With Leslie and everything that Leslie, why don't you come over and apologize? Leslie shows up to apologize, and it's a press conference for something, and no matter what Leslie tries to do, this Jennifer girl is like, ha ha ha, I gotcha.
That's exactly what's going on with me. No matter what words come out of my mouth, it's twisted, and it's just to make me look absolutely terrible.
None of it has anything to do with the actual election, with your job, with what your beliefs are. And I, as a voter who has turned out to every single election I could since the day I turned 18.
Good for you. Yes.
I'm and have harassed and harangued friends and yelled at them to vote. And gotten people to vote who had never ever voted in an election in their life, and they were well into their 30s. I appreciate you and what you're doing, and I can see the I can see you as a representative who
thank you.
is not. You may be running Republican because I feel like they kind of make you choose that they like Republican.
Yeah, you have to.
Rather than going, well, I feel
can't
this
do
way
anything.
about this topic, but this way about this.
Yeah,
And
why can't we be moderate? I'm a moderate. And by the way, do you want to come work my campaign? While we're talking about it,
You're
why
not
don't
the
you
first
just come
person to
on?
ask, actually.
Just come on to Elizabethtown. You can live with me for a few months. My husband won't mind.
with Amanda talking about being educated in LA, I think that's a great idea, and I think how can voters really be educated or to make that proper decision on who to vote for? Because like the smear campaigns, I mean, they're screaming so loud, so negatively. It almost drowns out the positivity of what you're trying to see,
and
or
the
to hear.
divisive politics going on right now. They're just using issues to keep us over here fighting with each other.
I'm over it. I'm over.
We are all over
these the personal debates.
Yeah, we're all over it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to throw something out there while we're here, and I hope, just because we are talking left and right and everything in between.
We're all over
but
the
I
place.
think, we were talking about, you're saying pick a side. And I think it's important, too, right now, regardless of who you're standing for our presidency, there's just not enough being said about Kennedy. I mean, it's like they're trying to keep him quiet. I want to hear his story, too. And
I'm
maybe
so glad you brought him up.
You
don't look like you're a fan, but
I'm sorry. Maybe I don't.
him.
And maybe
I'm a huge
I'm sorry.
fan, huge
I still
fan.
love you, Amanda. But
I love you too.
I just have to throw that out there. I just feel like I think I don't know. I want to hear everyone's
I'm
story.
a huge fan.
I'm not
I
saying
really
who
am.
I'm voting for. I'm just saying I want to hear all the stories. I want to hear it all, and I want like put them all on a platform together, and I want to hear what you're going to do so that I can make an educated decision.
I understand why people are fans of Kennedy, going back to prior to this election cycle, and some of the things that he's done and said are very much a turnoff for me as far as leading the country. That doesn't mean that, I don't look at politics of like, that guy's a bad guy, that guy's a good guy. Like, no, you've done things that I don't agree with on a political scale. And therefore I'm not interested.
And I think that's completely fair. I think there's probably things
They keep teasing Michelle Obama's going to run. I don't think she is, but if that happened,
I think there's probably things all three of these potential future presidents have done that I don't agree with. But but I don't know. I just throwing that out there, and I still love you. And I'm not saying who I'm voting for. I'm just saying, we don't sometimes hear about things, and people. It's just like if you didn't have that book in L.A., maybe you wouldn't have made the best decision, or maybe you would have changed your mind if you'd known something. And so I don't know. I'm just throwing out that out there. We can move forward now.
Yeah, no, I'm always look. I grew up. Both my grandparents were born again Christian, extraordinarily conservative. My godparents, who were really like my grandparents, were New York Democrats, and so I had West Virginia conservative born again, and two people of Jewish faith from Manhattan, and my mom was a hippie, dad was a rock star, but mom was a Democrat, dad was not. So I grew up around as much as I've talked about growing up around all faiths and observing that. It was the same for politics, and I think that's really why I am the way I am now. It's I don't want to have to vote along party lines. I want to vote based
for the candidate.
on specific where you stand on specific legislation.
Yeah, I personally would like to get rid of straight party voting. That's just my opinion. But, and only because I've heard from a lot of new voters, and they go to the polls and they think that Republican and Democrat means what are you registered as. So they'll say, oh, I'm registered as a Republican, and then they'll go down here and they'll choose the candidate they want. Well, that cancels everything else out.
Yes.
So, there's a whole lot of, like you said, voter education that's needed. But I would like to get rid of straight party voting and just say, vote for the candidate.
Well, and to me, that almost leads a voter into having to make a deeper, educated decision or do a little more research. It's not like you're just going to go take that test and hit one bubble and it's done. Let's just leave, and I'm going to pass the test.
We should be teaching that in schools, I think, voter education.
Well, there's a lot of things we should be teaching. But I agree. 100%.
I mean, and you'll never believe this, but I failed government in high school. I did, and I love to tell people that now because life just takes you in just the weirdest places, don't it?
The universe does that,
I just had no interest in high school. Did not even care.
Now I think the greatest experience or way to learn is through experience per se. And now you've spent 10 years on Capitol Hill fighting for something, and you've had to learn, and you've learned it well, and it's put you in a place where not only your passion and having compassion for others, but what you've learned, you're ready to put that to use.
I think it's time.
And on that note, I have one final question for you.
Okay.
What is the greatest piece of advice you've ever been given?
Let's see. Honestly, I don't know if it's the greatest piece of advice, but it's something that kind of guides me. And I always think persistence beats resistance. And that's all the time. And that's kind of guided me through the last 10 years of fighting for this, is that I knew I just could not give up. And it was mostly, because of patients that needed this or needed someone to fight for them. But persistence beats resistance.
I love that.
That's my favorite quote.
I like that.
I love that.
Meaning, no matter what you say, I'm still going to keep going.
Right? I mean, I feel like that applies to as an actor, since childhood.
Yeah.
I feel that in my core too.
Were you an actor too?
I have been, and I'm just
goodness,
now.
I
I
didn't
took
know
about a
that.
decade break, and I'm just now starting to get back into it, little by little. Having some auditions here and there, but
how cool!
I
That's
did
so cool.
a lot of TV and some features in my 20s, and now I'm
very cool.
starting back out. But persistence
Beats resistance.
and. Because as actors, our 90% of our job is getting rejected.
Yeah, I know. And you just have to persist. And, you can't give up. If it's something that means a lot to you, you just have to keep going.
Yeah.
No matter, you're going to get beat down no matter what you do. You just have to keep going.
Yeah.
So
I agree
love
with
that.
Thank you.
Well, before we head out, I did bring some gifts for her.
Yes.
For
my
coming up. So I brought you some
goodness.
ancient aromas goodies. I got you some canna soak. So on these hard days of
Thank
being out
you.
talking to folks, you can soak in that.
do it
And
tonight.
I brought you some earrings that you
Oh
can
my
wear.
gosh,
So
I love
when you get that fair debate down there, you can maybe
I'll wear 'em.
I don't know.
When I'm a representative, I'll wear them
There
right
you-
up on the house
there you
floor.
go.
How you like that?
And I brought you some lip balm.
Thank you. You really have amazing products.
Thank you. I appreciate
love
that.
it. Yes.
I appreciate it.
So,
I
Julie,
really-
before we
Okay.
go, where can our listeners and watchers, where can they find more information about you, how to vote for you?
Okay, well, I have a link tree / Vote Julie Cantwell, and then I have a website as well, votejulieCantwell.com, and of course you can find me on Facebook, anywhere else, or just email me, reach out to me, call me. All my information is on there.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the greatest,
Well,
the
thank
best of
you.
luck,
Absolutely.
and sometimes I don't know how long your current representative has been in there, but I think that we should. I think some people have said we should change our legislators like we do our underwear, but I think it's time, and sometimes we need to breathe fresh air into different places, and I would ask the people of your district to really look really hard at this. I'm not here to trash
No, absolutely.
your opponent. However, you have spent 10 years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. That has shown, and I know that it was a collective. There was many of you, but you spent a lot of time there, and I think that the voters in your district should look at that and really think about that when they go to the polls.
Well, I will say that. So my representative did vote no on medical cannabis, and it did hurt my feelings, only because more than 80% of our districts supported it and were asking for it and were begging him for it. And, so that was disappointing. I think your legislators should really just listen to you.
Yeah.
It's the most important part of being a legislator.
And if someone's in your district and they're on the fence about that topic, then maybe they should consider maybe a family or a member or a friend or someone who's suffering in a different district or whatever that case may be. But I really do wish you the best of luck,
thank
and
you.
I hope that the folks in your area will take a good look at the hard work you've put in over the past 10 years and give you a chance.
Well, thank you. I hope so too.
Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to come and sit down with us today. We really appreciate you.
Okay.
And when you win, we'll have you back.
Yay!
That's not an if. That's a win.
Hey.
Win-win.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Thank you. So thank you again, Julie, for
Yes.
being here with us today, for taking your time. Thank you to all of our listeners and watchers. If you like what you saw here today, please give us a follow, a like, a subscribe. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. We're working on TikTok. And thank you. We'll see y'all next week.
See you next week.
Go with me. Come on, Cannalachia.
I've never been to a silent disco, but I've been hearing about how cool they are. Have you all been?
They're pretty fun.
You put your headphones on and you just dance.
Yeah.